I just got a quick question about some of the data that you gave us in the last, just before we took a break, which is the increases for non-bargaining employees. In the first column, it says COLA 2%.
Right.
So is that now being characterized as a cost of living adjustment, or is it still something else?
Well, it is a cost of living adjustment, but it's pass-fail. So if you failed the eval, then you didn't get that, but basically that is there's no merit portion of that other than it's a pass-fail.
And what does it take to pass?
The 2.5 score or
Is
higher.
that considered like meeting expectations, I mean, or is it not?
So 2.5, we called 2.5 the score that would get you the minimum merit increase. But I guess, I mean, I think so. We're not really using meets or exceeds. We're not using those things anymore. It's just a score. So, I mean, if you were to ask my opinion, I suppose 3 is kind of average, but honestly, it really depends on the department heads. That's why we didn't do them all the same, you know what I mean? Because some departments might have an average of 3 and some might have an average of 4. So in a department that has an average of 3, you know, some of the scores might be 2.8 or 2.7, but they might be fine. You know, they might not be considered bad. You know, maybe the person got a markdown for an attendance issue or something like that. But the overall rest of the eval was fine. So that's why we said 2.5 is what we consider a passing eval. Is 2.5, which is technically below the average of 3, if you will, from a 1 to 5 scale. But.
All right, well, after much discussion with the committee, even before we got here today, we have an idea to try and get this contract wrapped up. In absence of having any seniority rights improvements, the union's not going to put our stamp of approval or recommendation for what I'm about to propose. However, we're willing to put it out there to see if the bargaining unit employees are willing to accept it or not. Understanding, you know, the elephant in the room is we don't have a majority. We understand that the majority is not dues paying members. And so we don't want to have that burden of holding up raises or increases on our shoulders. So this is what the idea that we came up with. All of the, I don't know if you still have my chart, the Pasco in September, it might have been October, I don't know. The date is September 1, but I think that was the date. It's updated 2, so I'll probably do it out in October or early in September. So our just an overview is that anything that's considered open in here, with the exception of leave of absence, which includes the PTO revision, and wages and salaries. So those would be Articles 19 and 41. Anything other than that, our proposal is to just leave the status quo. And we'd be willing to agree to the county's merit increase pay system, as well as the new revised PTO policy that you proposed today, in an effort to get this thing done. And to put it out to a vote and see how the bargaining unit employees feel about it, to either accept it or reject it. If they reject it, then obviously we gotta come back to bargaining. But that's our proposal.
So is that you're going to do a straw poll, or you're
No,
going to submit it for
It
ratification?
would be.
So you're going to sign off on it?
It's a TA, yeah, we'll sign off on TA. I'm just telling you that we're not going to put our stamp of recommendation on it.
Well, that's, as I recall, in one of the previous rounds, you did just the opposite. You went out and argued against it.
Well, we back when the other Barbara was here.
Yeah. It's either the second or the first or second impasse.
Well, we're not going to argue
You
against
TA'd
it.
and went out and petitioned against it.
We're not going to argue against it, but what we're going to take a neutral standpoint. We're not going to put our stamp of recommendation on it. We're going to let the employees vote their conscience. It will be pitched that way, that the local union is not recommending this contract because we don't have seniority rights in it, and that's the reason not we formed the union in the first place. However, we understand Christmas is coming, we understand there's raises on the table, we understand people are getting antsy and getting anxious, and so we're giving the employees the opportunity, and I've heard you, Jen, many times, why don't you just put it out to a vote, why don't you just put it out to, so that's what we're doing, we're just going to put it out to a vote. and let the employees dictate, whether this deal is good enough for them or not.
One quick question, Barbara, under your pay plan, our buddy, he's up here somewhere, I can't, you know what I'm talking about, somewhere over here.
I don't know which one you're talking
Mark,
about. Okay,
what would he get with this?
0, passed a eval,
Okay,
so
so what was the pass or fail grade?
2.5.
Okay.
So if you don't, just sort of on the evaluation thing, so I can explain it to people a little better. The 2.5%, if you did not, or the 2.5, if you did not make that 2.5, it says right on there that
You
you
have to-
must be evaluated within 90 days.
Correct.
If they come up in their evaluation, are they gonna get their pay raise?
They would get the 2%, but they wouldn't get any merit because they didn't
Okay.
pass, you know.
But they would still get something.
Yeah, I think they
For how
would,
much time, all the way up until the next
Nine.
fiscal year?
90 days. Well, after the 90
Okay.
days, so what happens is, what's supposed to happen, it's designed that way, is that if you scored under a 2.5, then you get put on a PIP, so you're put on a performance improvement plan,
For
and
90
these,
days, and at the
in
end of
90 days, at the
you'll
end of
be
90
evaluated.
days, you're either gonna be fired, or you're gonna, you know, you're gonna improve, and then you'll get your COLA. You wouldn't have gotten the merit because your increase was, your score was so low anyway, there's no merit portion of it that year, but we can give you the COLA if you pass eventually your eval.
And this is all bargaining unit employees?
That's everybody.
Everybody?
That's everybody
Okay.
in the whole county.
So,
It's the only ones that
okay.
aren't on there, there's like 1,600 and some odd employees, the only ones that aren't on there are fire bargaining unit. 'Cause they don't do
Okay,
that.
so according to this, there's like
That there's,
10, 12 people who won't get a raise in everybody.
well,
Under that is 2.5, right?
yeah,
I think
and
there's
some of
like
those
12
zeros,
people.
some of the zeros are not really zeros, they're actually just because they were, like all of these people, this, what you see as a zero
Uh-huh.
is people who weren't here long enough to get an evaluation.
okay,
So
okay.
sometimes they're at the end and it's just left blank, and
Okay.
sometimes
So
they
then it's
actually put
even
a
less
0
than-
in.
So then it'll be even
Yeah,
less
so
than
it's just
12.
these little ones, and not all of them are, half of them are not even in your bargaining unit. So there's 2 supervisors, there's
Yeah.
1 guy that's fired already, and there's, yeah, so
Okay,
it's very little.
The ones that have
I'm
no
sorry.
entries on, that's okay, the ones that have no entries on here, same deal.
Yep, yeah,
probation or
they're
something.
probationary employees, or they're, yeah, brand new, or they maybe were maxed out, or something, you know, they might have been over max or something like
So
that.
that's not.
We had,
this is the,
This-
this
this-
is the entire
That's the entire
county.
unit, this is non-bargaining to show what they actually received from merit, because bargaining didn't give merits because
Okay,
it's
yeah,
bargaining.
right, right.
right, I think there were about maybe 8 people countywide who were at max, something about that, out of 2,300. So. Well, and then the fire had 1,700.
So I want to be clear that what your position is, since you alluded to the fact that you had talked about this even before we started today's bargaining session, the proposals that we made today, you're rejecting.
Absolutely.
So if I look at your list, everywhere where there's a blank where it doesn't say TA, with the exception of 19 and 41, it would be status quo. Is that right? On 19, you're accepting our
Revised PTO language.
the revised PTO, and on 41, you're accepting our proposal on that, performance-based pay.
The only thing we haven't talked about is.
And that's a package deal.
Yeah, well, the only thing we haven't talked about in the package deal is the, in lieu of having retro, is there going to be bonuses, or are you willing to do retro? Because we're about 8 weeks past October 1, so we have to have, I think last time we did, what was it, 425?
Right.
We will respond to that after the break. I just want to got a couple more questions for you, so I think. All of your previous proposals you're withdrawing.
Because some of those are in here on the chart that are.
But we can't come back in and cherry pick your list, right?
No,
So we can't come back in and say, okay, so 41 wages and salary is off the table because we've agreed to it, but we reject everything else.
It's a package deal.
Okay.
If there's something that we propose that you want to agree to, so I mean. we'll expand our package to include our proposal.
So we just need to go back and figure out what we're not willing to not leave in, and then that's pretty much it. So, because there are some things that we propose that we're not willing to not have in the contract, that is new stuff, but it may not all be that way, so we'll go back and figure
Well,
it out.
and it's in the spirit of getting a package deal, because, you know, I'm not interested, I mean, we had a phone conversation the other day about, you know, just general terms. You know, we're interested in getting this thing done. I have, you know, a ton of work on my plate. We have, you know, some dynamics in our local union, we're having a regime change, our boss is retiring, there's a lot of stuff that it's better for us as an organization to try and get this thing buttoned up if we can. You know, I know there's a reference to decerting and influence, and to be quite honest, it's not, it's just other factors. So we're willing to concede on a lot of things that we've been fighting very, very hard for, and we have to answer to our members, why did we back off things that we were told that come hell or high water, this has to be in the contract this time around, or, you know, we need to go to impasse. So we have to deal with our side.
Right, and I have the same exact issue. I will give you the example, the rotating wheel. If that's not in, I can't close the deal. So, I mean, there's a couple things on our side that we've been told by your bargaining unit members, not necessarily dues paying members, that don't you dare don't get away from the table without this.
Okay, so do you want me to get a bunch of our members in here start dictating what's gonna be in contract?
No, I mean, I'm just telling you, and I agree with them, so I mean, obviously, I'm going to,
Look,
there's gonna be certain.
Yeah, the point is we bargain with you for their interest or their disinterest, whatever the case may be. But that
I have to
doesn't
solve
stop
problems.
employees
Right.
that work for the county from expressing their points of view
Right,
Sure.
to HR. We can't ignore that.
right,
I
You know,
understand that.
but what they understand is you bargain for them.
right.
And the compromise here to get a deal is what has been offered. We're not excited about this, this is not something we feel necessarily great about, but to get a deal, to get these folks, potentially get a raise if they voted in, prior to Christmas, you know, if we can get it done that fast, it would be great. It's something that we're willing to, and who knows, we may have this overwhelming movement to reject this thing, I don't know. I assure you that we're gonna be taking a neutral position, however, it's not an endorsement, like I said before. And so the employees will vote their conscience. If you want to continue to get things in the contract that you don't have now,
We have to. I mean, quite frankly, we don't have a
okay, well, if
choice.
that's what you want to do, then maybe
Yeah.
we'll end up at impasse, I don't know.
Okay. No, we don't have a choice. I mean, honestly, we have marching orders that absolutely, because maybe you're not experiencing, we're experiencing huge problems outside of this, because of some of the things that are in the contract now. And so even though we sit here and say, oh, well, it's just gonna be all status quo, well, status quo is not working for us. So we're addressing things that are not working
Well, it's
status
actually not
quo.
working for us either, Barbara.
Well, okay, then maybe it's time
Compromise to get a deal, that's
Well,
what
I don't wanna say, hey, let's just throw everything away and make it all, I know it's all bad, but let's just do it anyway, because that way we can get it done.
Okay,
That's
let me
not,
put it this way, you're not going to be able to legally implement your PTO policy until we have a deal. You're not gonna be able to legally implement these increases for all those people that are screaming for money until we have a deal.
I agree.
And so if we end up at impasse and that gets delayed, and okay, well, the first date we're gonna get is probably April 2018, and, you know, who knows what's gonna happen. So
We know.
it probably behooves the county, at least to get this thing done as much as it does the union. It's just a thought. Maybe you don't care, maybe you just wanna drag things out. I mean, but we come into bargaining, as the law requires us to, with the reasonable expectation to reach an agreement. And so this is what our proposal is. We have a lot of marching orders too. We have a lot of,
Okay.
members that are telling us this, people who were there from the day one before you came around, that said that this has to be in the contract, or else what? You're gonna drop out? Okay, I guess you gotta drop out. So we have that same friction on our side. But you have our proposal, that's what our offer is, and,
Okay, I think the only thing that troubles me is your distinction, which is really not a distinction, between the union taking a neutral stand on what's gonna be submitted for ratification to your members, and you expressing that by saying the union's not recommending it. Because the last time we reached an agreement in this kind of scenario,
I didn't say that, I didn't say what I said.
no, you advocated strongly against the ratification of the contract, even though you had signed off on it.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, I didn't say in bargaining with the recording on and the camera on that we're taking a neutral standpoint. I never said that, because I never intended to take a neutral standpoint. And basically, that was the best deal that.
Well,
we
whether you
had.
said it or not, the effect was you signed off on a contract, which means we reached an agreement on it at the table,
Right.
and then you advocated against it
Correct.
and delayed the contract anyway.
Because we wanted to send a message to Ms. DeSimone, and respond to you, your repeated request. Why don't you just put it to a vote? Why don't you just put it to a vote? Why don't you just put it, okay, we'll put it to a vote, Jim, you win. We put it to a vote. Don't suggest you vote for it, but this is what the county wants us to do. This is what the best offer is at the time. We can continue to bargain until the cows come home. Nothing's gonna change. We're steadfast in our position. So what I'm telling you is whatever year that was, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, is a different scenario than today. Today's scenario, today's message is, we're going to be taking a neutral standpoint,
Well,
but not recommending it. So we're not gonna say, Local 79 endorses this contract, Local 79 recommends that you vote it, it's a great deal, we fought hard for it, vote yes. We're just gonna say that this is the best provisions we can get at this time, and this is what they are.
Okay.
And you vote your conscience, and we'll see where the chips fall. I really don't know. I don't know whether it's gonna be endorsed or not, but we're not gonna be campaigning against it. We're not gonna be advocating people to vote no on it. We're gonna just have a neutral standpoint. So that's the distinction between last time and this time.
Well, the you you're referring to is your office as opposed to the members of your team?
No,
Is that the commitment we have from the members of your team, that,
that is the commitment that I instruct people on our team to convey.
okay,
If they go rogue on me, I can't tell you, you know, you got supervisors that go rogue on you.
all right, let's take a break.